My grandson stabbed a forkful of roast and said, "We put Nana in the old folks' lottery." The room froze. Every smile turned brittle. By dessert, they thought they'd decided my fate. But what I'd set in motion that night would flip the game and leave them wondering how I'd beaten them without lifting a finger. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The knife was halfway through the roast when Ethan dropped it. "We put Nana in the old folks' lottery." The blade clinked against the platter, and the rosemary steam seemed to pause in midair. Chairs creaked. The house hummed with its usual Sunday noises, the old clock ticking, the porch fan throbbing against the mountain heat, but the table went still as a lake before thunder. Paula's smile arrived first, bright and brittle as a showroom window. "He's kidding," she sang, but she didn't look at Ethan. She looked at me, measuring. Brian didn't look at anyone. He studied his plate like it held the answer to a question he'd been dodging since high school. I kept the hostess grin I've worn since church suppers in '79. "Lottery?" I passed the green beans to Joanne with a steady hand. "Lord, we got scratch-offs after Grace now?" Joanne raised one gray eyebrow and tucked the bowl toward her. Her bracelets whispered as she moved, silver against the soft rust of the table runner we picked out at the craft fair last fall. She'd insisted on coming over because Sundays aren't for eating alone, and I'd let her. I was glad I had. Ethan reddened to the ears. He's still got that baby chick fuzz along his jaw he pretends is a beard. "It's just, we're just talking options," he said, words stepping on each other. "Like, facilities, assisted living. We're putting in for a few, seeing who has wait lists, pooling resources," Paula supplied smoothly, laying a manicured hand over his forearm as if she were the patient one wrangling children. "It's what responsible families do, Maggie. You know these places have lotteries to get on lists, and there are buy-ins. We're doing our due diligence." "The old folks' lottery," Joanne muttered, fork hovering. "Catchy." Brian cleared his throat. "It's just, don't we all want what's best for Mom?" I buttered a roll I didn't want and took my time, because the trick to surviving a sudden cold front is to keep your hands warm. Well, I suppose I should be glad I made it to the semifinals. Ethan winced. It pricked me, that flicker of guilt. There's a good boy in there under the flop sweat and bad decisions. His eyes met mine for exactly one heartbeat, and he looked so sorry it almost knocked the breath out of me. "Don't make this dramatic," Paula said, still smiling, still posed. She'd come in a sheath dress with a cardigan tied neatly over her shoulders, as if dinner at my house were a step and repeat. "We've toured a couple very nice communities. You'd have a balcony, fitness classes. They do wine nights. You'd be with people your own age." "God save me from fitness classes," Joanne said deadpan, "and wine nights with people who call them wine nights." "Joe," I said, soft, and she spread her hands. I tried. From the porch, a car eased past on our quiet street, a Subaru with a kayak on top. It was that blue hour when Asheville's hills go velvety purple, and the light through the window made little fires in the dust above the dining room table. The house smelled like garlic and pine cleaner and the clove soap I keep by the sink. My late husband's photograph watched from the sideboard. Him in his flannel, sawdust on his shoulders, a mountain behind him, eternal and amused. "Where am I on the bracket?" I asked lightly. "Do I get a say before regionals, or have you picked my mascot?" Paula laughed, relieved to be back on her court. "You're impossible. We just don't want you overwhelmed, Maggie. The stairs here, your knee. Remember last winter? God forbid you fall with no one around." "I'm around," Joanne said. "2 doors down. And last winter I pulled you out of a snowbank when you tried those ridiculous wedges at the Christmas market." "You weren't exactly sober," I said, and her mouth curled. We could have kept batting it back and forth, kept it warm, ordinary. But the cold had already crept into the room. "Mom," Brian said softly, still staring at the gravy. "We just want to talk." He always wants to talk in ways that don't produce decisions. He's good at talking around Paula, like a river around a rock. I slid the potatoes closer to Ethan. "Tell me how it works, sweetheart." "The lottery." He swallowed. Paula's hand tightened. "It's not." "Okay. some of them have, like, waitlist fees, non-refundable, and we were thinking of putting together the money just to hold a spot, so when it makes sense. Later. Later, Joanne echoed. Always later for the person who writes the checks, right? Paula kept her voice sugar-thin. Ethan gets carried away with words. What he means is, it's wise to plan. You know that better than anyone. I put down my knife, finally. My smile stayed. It had to. The room felt so very small all of a sudden, as if the walls had taken a step inward. I thought of the shed out back, how it still held the smell of cedar shavings and oil, the quiet where you could hear your own thoughts without someone naming them for you. Well, I said, pouring iced tea, the lemon slice clinking against the glass. If we're putting in tickets, you should at least tell me the prize package. Ethan's lip twitched. Humor, nerves, both. They have a library and a shuffleboard thing. I can die happy, Joanne said. We'll bring over the brochures, Paula added, triumphant now, sensing ground gained. I have them in the car, actually. Thought we might look after dessert. Proactive, I said. I sipped. The tea was too sweet, or my mouth had gone too dry. Brian finally ventured a look at me. His eyes are my eyes on a tired day. No pressure, he murmured, but his wife's shadow crossed over the table, long and thin. I watched my grandson's hands, how they trembled when he passed the butter, how he tucked them under the chair when he realized. He'd told me the truth because his body doesn't know how to keep lies steady. My body learned long ago in PTA meetings and hospital waiting rooms, and through a marriage that loved me like an oak loves the wind, steady, but not always gentle. You learn to hold still until the gust passes. Let's not ruin a good meal. I tapped the serving spoon against the bowl. Ethan, take more carrots. Paula, I made that pecan pie you like. It's cooling. She brightened. That's perfect. Joanne's foot nudged my ankle under the table. A question. A promise. I held her gaze for a beat and gave the smallest nod. I could feel the old engine turning over inside me, the one I keep tuned in case of storms, the part of me that makes lists when the power flickers, that checks the flashlights, that counts the jars in the pantry. Ethan took the carrots. He opened his mouth, closed it. Nana, I set my napkin on my lap very precisely and looked at him like we were the only two in the room. It's all right, honey, I said, still in that Sunday voice, warm enough to float on. We'll play by the rules. Paula exhaled, a victorious little sigh. I smiled wider, the way you do right before you ask the winning question at trivia night. So, I said, leaning in, my fork shining in the lamplight. Who gets to keep my house while I'm off winning? Ethan's next breath snagged. Paula's smile didn't reach her eyes, and in the sudden hush, the old clock on the wall tilted toward the hour, ready to chime. The cicadas were loud when I opened the door to walk Ethan out. Summer was folding itself into night, and the porch light threw a golden cone onto the walkway. Paula was already in the car, the engine idling. Brian sat in the passenger seat staring straight ahead. They didn't look back. Ethan lingered on the top step, rubbing his palms against his jeans. Nana? His voice was pitched low, as if Paula might still hear through glass and distance. I closed the door behind me. Go on? He glanced toward the car, then toward the quiet dark between the neighbors' azaleas. She's been looking at your bank stuff, your tax returns. Says it's just in case something happens. I didn't know she was... He cut himself off, jaw tight. She's got a folder, keeps it in her desk. My breath stayed steady, but my fingers curled against the porch rail. When did you see it? Last week. She was on the phone with I don't know, somebody about a property listing. His eyes searched mine. I thought it was just talk. Until tonight. The car horn chirped twice, sharp and impatient. Paula's silhouette moved in the driver's seat. I laid my hand on his arm. Go on, before she comes in here herself. I didn't tell her I told you, he said quickly. Don't let her know. Then he was down the steps, jogging awkwardly toward the car. He slid inside without another glance. The taillights bled red across the driveway, then disappeared down the quiet street. I stood there a long moment, listening to the fan hum inside the screened porch, the way the boards under my feet remembered my husband's boots. Then I went in, found the phone on its cradle, and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. It rang twice. "Caleb Price," came the familiar gravel-edged voice. "Caleb, it's Maggie Doyle," I said. "We need to meet. Tomorrow morning, if you can." A pause. "My office? 9 a.m.? That'll do." When I hung up, Joanne was leaning in the kitchen doorway, her sweater wrapped tight around her like she'd been holding herself still. "Want me to come?" I shook my head. "You've done enough for one evening." She didn't move. "You sure?" "Yes." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I can handle a bank meeting on my own." She studied me for another heartbeat, then gave a short nod and stepped aside. The front door clicked shut behind her a minute later, her footsteps fading across the gravel between our houses. Night pressed in slow. I didn't turn on the television or the radio. I didn't need noise to think. The house smelled faintly of pie crust and the roast's cooling fat. I carried a mug of chamomile to the living room and sank into my husband's old armchair. It was still molded to his frame, broad in the shoulders, worn in the elbows. I could almost hear the scrape of his pen on the crossword, the quiet snort when I'd suggest a wrong answer just to make him look up. From this seat, I could see the bookshelf he built, the photograph of us at Lake Lure in the summer of '85, and on the far wall, the shadowed outline of the gun cabinet we'd emptied years ago. He'd told me once, "Paperwork's heavier than steel if you know how to use it." I'd laughed then. Now the words sat heavy in my lap. I set the empty mug aside and pulled the cedar box from under the end table. Inside, a folder of property deeds, each one smelling faintly of dust and oil ink, my past 10 years of tax returns, an envelope of bank statements bound with a brittle rubber band. I spread them out on the coffee table, the paper whispering against paper. The handwriting on the oldest deed, the one for the commercial lot near the river, was my husband's, bold and certain. I ran my thumb over the ink as if I could press some of that certainty into myself. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed. I froze, listening. It was nothing, probably a neighbor coming home. But the sound curled the air tight in my chest. I stacked the documents neatly, slid them back into the box and carried it to the hall closet, tucking it behind the winter blankets. Tomorrow would come fast, and when it did, I'd be ready to ask Caleb the kind of questions you don't put in writing. But tonight. I left one light burning in the kitchen and locked every door twice. The next morning broke clear and sharp, the kind of mountain air that makes every nail and hinge in the house sound louder. I was at the kitchen table before sunrise, sorting through the cedar box again, making sure I hadn't missed anything. That's when I saw it. An envelope wedged flat against the bottom, its corner pressed into the grain like it had been waiting for me to find it. My name was written in his hand. Not Maggie, not Margaret, but Mags, the way he only wrote when it was just us. The paper was the heavy kind he liked, with faint blue lines and a smell of cedar that matched the box. My fingers hesitated over the flap, like opening it might change the temperature of the room. Inside, 2 sheets of his blocky script and a photocopy of an old land plat map. The letter began plainly, like he was talking to me across the breakfast table. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to tell you in person. Years back, I put money into parcels nobody wanted. You remember the Ridge property and the strip by the river? They've doubled, maybe tripled since then. There's an account tied to them, private under my name and yours. Only you can walk in and claim it. You'll need the key in my tool chest and the bank code in the blue ledger in the shed. Don't let Paula near it. She's got hungry hands." I set the letter down and let the last line echo in my head. We'd never been unkind about her out loud, but between us, there had always been a wariness. My husband's was sharper than mine. "Too quick to count what isn't hers," he'd said after she'd offered to help with our insurance paperwork one Christmas. I'd brushed it off then. I wasn't brushing anything off now. By 8:30 I was dressed and walking down Main toward the bank, the letter folded into my bag, the morning sun catching on shop windows. Asheville's downtown still smelled faintly of bread from the early bakeries, and I could almost pretend this was an ordinary errand. Caleb Price's office was tucked behind the glass and brick front of First Carolina Bank. He rose when I came in, taller than I remembered, hair more silver than brown now. Maggie, he said, with the kind of smile you give someone you've known through births and funerals. We shook hands and I handed him the letter and the key. He read without rushing, then leaned back in his chair. I remember these parcels, he said finally. Your husband was stubborn in the right ways. Is it still there? I asked. He nodded. Active and in very good health. You're the only signatory. Not even the family court could pry this open without you. The air in the room shifted, lighter for a moment. I let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding. He studied me. You could tie this up so no one could touch it. Move it into a protected trust, lock it behind the right paperwork. And Paula wouldn't see a dime, I said. And Paula wouldn't even know it existed, he corrected gently. I closed my bag around the letter. Confidentiality, Caleb. Not a whisper. You have it, he said, his voice as firm as the safe behind him. We went over the forms I'd need, what could be done quietly, what should wait. By the time I stepped back onto the sidewalk, the courthouse bells were chiming noon. People passed with coffee cups and grocery bags, unaware that in my purse was a map to something Paula would never get her hands on. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of honeysuckle from somewhere down the block. For a heartbeat, I felt steadier. Then I spotted, across the street, a figure standing too still for a passerby. Sunglasses, hair pulled back tight, phone in hand, watching. Paula. She raised the phone, not quite pointing it at me, but close enough to feel the prickle along my spine. I didn't wave. I didn't change my pace. I simply walked past the diner toward home, my husband's last instructions burning a hole through the lining of my bag. Paula came on a Wednesday morning, unannounced but with the crisp efficiency of someone who assumed her visit was a favor. I saw the gleam of her SUV through the front window before the knock came, 2 brisk raps, then the door easing open without waiting for an answer. "Maggie," she called, stepping inside like she owned a set of keys. "I brought something for us to look at." She carried a glossy tote bag, the kind realtors hand out at open houses, and from it she drew a stack of brochures so thick they could have doubled as paving tiles. Smiling, she spread them across my kitchen table as though unveiling treasure. Shiny pages fanned out in front of me, sunlit lobbies, smiling seniors with champagne flutes, aerial shots of manicured lawns that had never seen a stray dandelion. "These are the top-tier places," she said, tapping one with a French manicured nail. "You'd have your own suite. Activities every day? Chef-prepared meals? And medical on call, of course." Brian was already at the table, coffee in hand, his flannel shirt creased from the dryer. He gave me a small, neutral nod, the kind a referee gives when he doesn't want to commit to a call. He didn't touch the brochures. Paula flipped another open, pointing to a photograph of a couple in matching golf polos. "Look at this. Wellness center, salon, even a wine cellar. You'd have people around all the time, Maggie. It's safer, easier." I let her talk. My hands stayed folded on the table, my eyes moving over the pages but not settling. Her voice had the rhythm of a well-rehearsed pitch, careful pauses for my imagined agreement, small laughs meant to soften the idea that my life could be packaged and sold square footage at a time. "Best for everyone," she said at last, with that faint lift at the end that turned it into something almost saintly. "You wouldn't be alone, and we'd have peace of mind knowing you were taken care of." Brian sipped his coffee and stared at the rim of his mug. The steam curled up and vanished into the morning light. I gave her a slow nod. "It's worth considering," I said. That was all. No fight, no protest. Just a small opening, and I could feel her slide into it like water through a crack. Her smile sharpened. "Good. I'll leave these with you. Take your time. But spots do fill fast." She gathered her bag and kissed the air near my cheek before heading out. Brian followed, muttering something about errands, his mug still on the table with a ring of coffee cooling at the bottom. The screen door clicked shut, and a moment later the rumble of their car faded down the street. "Considering, huh?" Joanne's voice came from the doorway. She must have heard the SUV pull away and wandered over. She eyed the glossy spread on the table like it might bite. "She smells blood, Maggie. You gave her that." I leaned back in my chair. "Let her think it makes her sloppy." Joanne crossed her arms. Sloppy is one thing, cornered is another. You planning to sit here and wait until she brings a moving truck? I slid the top brochure aside and reached for the phone. No. The receiver felt solid in my hand, like it remembered the weight of urgent calls. I dialed a number I'd memorized years ago but never thought I'd use for myself. Aaron Ford's office, a woman answered. This is Maggie Doyle, I said. Tell Aaron I need to see her. Soon. How soon? She asked. I watched the sun catch on the edges of the brochures, making the smiling strangers on the covers shine a little too bright. Tomorrow, I said. First thing. The next morning, the sky hung low and pewter, the kind of weather that made Main Street's brick facades look older, more watchful. I parked in front of the old hardware store, the one with the faded ghost sign for Harrison & Sons still clinging to its side wall. Aaron Ford's office was up a narrow flight of creaking stairs that smelled faintly of varnish and rain-damp wood. She was waiting at the top, leaning in the doorway, hair pulled into a loose knot, a pair of reading glasses perched halfway down her nose. Maggie Doyle, she said, her smile carrying a history I could feel but not quite name. Come on in. Her office had the quiet weight of a place where deals were made without fanfare, built-in bookshelves heavy with law volumes, a brass lamp casting warm pool of light over a walnut desk. Outside, the rain had started, a steady tapping on the tall windows. We got straight to it. I slid the manila folder across her desk, property deeds, account statements, the letter from my husband folded carefully at the back. Erin scanned each page, her pen tapping lightly against her chin. We'll put everything into a living trust, she said finally, voice low and decisive. You as sole trustee. We'll name Joanne Parks and Ethan Doyle as successor trustees in that order. Brian and Paula are not to be included under any circumstance. I nodded once. And my medical authority? Her eyes flicked up. Gone from Paula. We'll draft a new medical power of attorney, Joanne first, Ethan second. That way, if anyone tries to interfere, the paperwork's already in place. She started typing, the keys clicking steady as a metronome. Between the tap of the rain and the scratch of her pen on the forms, the room felt sealed from the rest of the world. I signed page after page, my name flowing in the same loops my husband used to tease me about. With each signature, a little of the tightness in my chest eased. By mid-afternoon, Aaron had everything filed, electronic copies sent, hard copies sealed. She leaned back, satisfied. It's all buttoned up. No one touches a thing without your say-so. The first true breath I'd taken in weeks slid out of me, slow and deep. I hadn't realized how heavy the last few months had been until the weight shifted. Thank you, I said. Aaron smiled faintly. I owed you one anyway. When I stepped back out onto Main Street, the rain had slowed to a mist. Joanne was leaning against her car at the curb, arms crossed. She didn't bother with small talk, just scanned my face and read the answer there. That's check, she said with the satisfaction of someone who'd been playing the long game. Now we wait for her to make the next move. We didn't have to wait long. That evening, as I was fixing a pot of tea, the doorbell rang, once hard enough to rattle the glass. A courier stood there in a rain-spotted jacket, holding an envelope with my name, printed in the crisp, impersonal font of law offices. Need your signature, he said. I signed, closed the door, and tore the flap open with my thumb. Inside, a formal notice of intent to file for temporary guardianship. Petitioning party, Paula Doyle. The justification was a paragraph of polished venom about concerns for cognitive decline and recent erratic financial activity. The paper trembled only once in my hands before I set it flat on the counter. South Paula wasn't just playing the long game. She was already moving her queen. Paula showed up the next morning with the same look people wear when they've already decided how the conversation will end. No phone call, no knock, just her perfume announcing itself a second before she rounded the corner into my kitchen, a leather portfolio tucked under one arm. Morning, Maggie, she said brightly, sliding into the chair opposite me. I've brought something to make things easier. She unzipped the portfolio and laid out a neat stack of papers, the top one bristling with little flags in neon pink. Just a bit of housekeeping, she said, smoothing the pages with her palm. Some updates so everything's in order. Medical contacts, property details, that sort of thing. Best to get ahead of these things. I picked up the first sheet and let my eyes drift across the tidy paragraphs. Her gaze was on me, sharp and expectant. I kept my face warm, curious, while my eyes followed a thread of legalese down the page. In consideration of the transferor's interest, I slowed, tilting the paper toward the morning light. Buried 3 clauses deep, there it was. The deed to the primary residence shall hereby transfer in fee simple to... I didn't need to read the name to know. "Well?" she asked, sipping the coffee she'd poured herself from my pot. I set the page down carefully, aligning its edges with the stack. "Looks straightforward," I said, "but you know me. Never could resist a good bedtime read." Her smile twitched. "No need for that. It's just standard. Sign here, initial there. We can get the notarization this afternoon." I slid the stack an inch closer to me. "Leave it, I'll read it tonight." She leaned back, her hand still on the portfolio as though she might reclaim the papers if I pushed too far. "Maggie." "Tonight," I said, sugar in my voice and steel underneath. "I like to know what I'm signing." Her eyes held mine for a beat too long. Then she pushed her chair back, the legs scraping the tile. "Fine. But don't drag your feet. Opportunities can... expire." She gathered her bag, pausing at the doorway. "I'll check in tomorrow." The door closed behind her with a finality I recognized. Not victory, not yet, but retreat. The moment her SUV rolled out of the drive, I lifted the stack again and walked to the phone. Erin picked up on the second ring. "She brought papers," I said. "Hidden in the middle, there's a property transfer." Erin's inhale was sharp. "Don't sign anything. I'll want to see the exact language." "They're in my hands now." "Lock them up," she said. "I'll be in touch this afternoon." I hung up, carried the documents to the study, and slid them into the bottom drawer of my desk, the one with the old brass key that sticks if you turn it too fast. I turned it slow, feeling the click settle into place. By the time I stepped back into the kitchen, Joanne was at the back door, tapping the glass with 2 knuckles. She took one look at my face and came in without waiting for an invitation. "Well?" she asked. "She tried to take the house," I said, pouring 2 mugs of coffee. Joanne let out a low whistle. "Bold. Or desperate." She took her mug, leaning against the counter. "You know what happens to desperate people when they think they're close to winning?" "They get sloppy," I said. Her grin was sharp. "Exactly. So we give her room to overstep, make her say out loud what she's been doing in the dark." I turned that over in my mind, the steam from my coffee curling into the quiet space between us. Through the window, I could see the edge of the porch where Paula's shoes had left faint wet prints on the boards. "Let her think she's almost got me," I murmured. Joanne's eyes gleamed. "And then?" I looked back at the locked study door. "Then I'll make sure the whole town hears her say it." By Friday, the plan was set so neatly, it felt almost domestic, like deciding which pie to bake for Sunday supper. I called Paula mid-morning, pitched my voice light as if nothing in the world had shifted. "Why don't you and Brian come by for lunch?" I said. "I've made chicken salad, thought we could catch up." She accepted before I'd even finished the sentence. Joanne arrived early, carrying a Tupperware of her potato salad as cover. We moved through the kitchen without speaking much. She set the container in the fridge. I laid out plates. When she passed me a cloth napkin, I caught the glint of the small black recorder she slipped into her sweater pocket. "I'll be in the front room," she murmured. "Door open just enough." At 12:30 sharp, the Doyles arrived. Paula breezed in wearing a linen blazer the color of old money, Brian trailing behind in his work jacket, smelling faintly of gasoline and sawdust. I kept my smile steady as I ushered them to the table. We ate in the polite rhythm of people playing at civility, forks tapping, chairs creaking, the occasional hum of approval over the food. It didn't take Paula long to lean forward, elbows on the table, voice soft but insistent. "Maggie," she began, "you know it's important to make decisions now, while you're clear-minded." Brian's fork paused halfway to his mouth. He didn't look at me, but he didn't look at her either. "I'm clear enough," I said, pouring iced tea into her glass. "Why the rush?" "It's not a rush," she said, tilting her head. It's being responsible. These things can take time. Selling property, settling accounts, getting you settled somewhere safe. The words hung between us, honeyed but heavy. From the front room, a floorboard whispered under Joanne's careful weight. Brian shifted in his seat. Paula, maybe? She cut him a glance sharp enough to still him. We just want to be ready, Maggie. I've already spoken to a realtor about preliminary steps. There it was. Slipped out so casually you might miss the teeth in it. I let the words sit a beat, pretending to fuss with the chicken salad bowl, knowing Joanne's recorder was catching every syllable. A realtor, I said lightly. And here I thought this was just about chicken salad. Paula gave a small laugh. Too quick. Just exploring options. Brian cleared his throat, the sound thick. Nothing's been decided. I leaned back, folding my hands in my lap. Well, I appreciate the concern. It's good to know you're thinking of me. Paula's smile faltered just a fraction, as if she'd expected more push, some hint of a fight. I gave her none. Instead, I began stacking plates, standing to carry them to the sink. You're leaving? She asked. Busy afternoon, I said, already walking toward the door. Thank you both for coming by. They rose, Brian giving me a small, almost apologetic nod, Paula still wearing the pleasant mask that didn't reach her eyes. When the door closed behind them, the house seemed to exhale. Joanne stepped out from the front room, holding the recorder like a precious stone. Got it all, she said. Through the lace curtain, I watched Paula's SUV back down the drive. She had one hand on the wheel, the other moving fast over her phone screen, planning her next move. So was I. Monday morning, the bank smelled of fresh toner and brewed coffee, the way it always did before customers started streaming in. Caleb's office door was already open, his jacket slung over the back of the chair like he'd been expecting me. He rose, shook my hand once, and locked the door behind me. "You're ready to move it?" he asked without ceremony. I set my bag on the desk and nodded. Everything except the checking. That stays here for bills. He pulled a fresh folder from the cabinet, the thick paper whispering as he laid it flat. We'll create a trust entity. Your name as trustee, successor trustees already filed. The moment it's done, your private account will live under that umbrella. Any inquiries without your signature will hit a legal brick wall. I slid the envelope of documents toward him, my husband's letter, the property details, the key for the private account. Caleb handled each with deliberate care, feeding the numbers into his system. The quiet was punctuated only by the soft clack of keys and the muted shuffle of papers. When he handed me the first form, I signed with a hand that didn't shake. Another, sign, another, sign. With each stroke of the pen, it felt less like paperwork and more like boarding up a house before the hurricane makes landfall. An hour later, it was done. My assets, what Paula thought of as her inheritance in waiting, were now tucked behind layers of protection she couldn't breach. Caleb leaned back, satisfaction flickering across his features. If she calls here asking about balances or holdings, all she'll get is no record on file. Even if she went through court, she'd find herself running in circles. That's exactly where I want her, I said. As I stood to leave, Caleb handed me a slim paper slip, a transfer confirmation with the full amount listed in bold black ink. I folded it once, then once more, sliding it into my bag. That slip would never make it into my files. It had a different destination. That afternoon, I stopped by the coffee shop on my way home, knowing Paula often dropped in on the pretense of checking my pantry or helping with mail. I left my bag on the counter, open just enough for the folded slip to peek out between a grocery list and the latest electric bill. Sure enough, by the time I came back from fetching firewood, the slip was gone. The grocery list was still there. The phone rang within the hour. It was Ethan, his voice low like he'd stepped outside to call. "She found something," he said. She didn't say what, but I could tell. Her face went red. She's going to blow when she sees she's cut out. I stirred the pot of soup simmering on the stove. "Good," I said. "Anger is sloppy." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "You're playing a dangerous game, Nana." "I'm just playing it better than she is." From the kitchen window, I could see the long shadow of the oak stretching toward the porch as the sun lowered. Somewhere down the road, a car engine revved, then stilled. I had the sudden, bone-deep sense that the first real crack had appeared in Paula's veneer. And cracks have a way of spreading. It was just past 10 when the knock came, firm, official, nothing like Paula's brisk rap or Joanne's double tap. Through the window, I saw two women in county badges, clipboards in hand, scanning my porch like they were cataloging it for evidence. "Mrs. Doyle?" the taller one asked when I opened the door. Her tone was courteous but clipped. "We're with Buncombe County Adult Protective Services. We've received a report concerning your welfare. May we come in?" I stepped aside without fuss. Of course. Kitchen's warm. They followed me in, eyes moving over every surface, every stack of papers, the neat row of mugs on the counter. The shorter one, Ms. Green according to her badge, set her clipboard down. "We've had allegations of self-neglect, possible cognitive decline, and financial mismanagement." I poured coffee for all three of us. "That's quite a list." The taller one, Ms. Lopez, pulled out a form. "We'll need to ask some questions and review any relevant documents you can provide." "Let's make it easy then." I slid a thick folder across the table. My trust paperwork, bank summaries, receipts. On top, I placed a sealed envelope labeled "Medical Reports, Dr. Heller" in my own hand. Last physical was in May. Blood pressure like a girl of 20. They leafed through, professional masks in place but eyes betraying a flicker of surprise at how tidy it all was. "Oh," I added, reaching into the sideboard drawer. "And one more thing." I set Joanne's recorder on the table and pressed play. Paula's voice filled the kitchen, smooth, confident, admitting she'd already spoken to a realtor about my house. The social workers exchanged a look. Ms. Green stopped taking notes. "That recording's from last Friday's lunch," I said mildly. "I imagine it paints a fuller picture of my situation." They didn't finish their coffee. 10 minutes later, they stood at the door, promising to file a report that would close the matter. Ms. Lopez's tone had softened. "If anything changes, Mrs. Doyle, call us directly. And," she hesitated, "be careful." I watched their county sedan disappear down the road, then went back to my soup pot, the house returning to its familiar quiet. It didn't last. An hour later, Paula's SUV crunched into the drive. She didn't knock, just pushed the door open so hard it bounced off the wall. Her cheeks were blotched red, hair slightly askew like she'd been raking her hands through it. "You think you're clever?" she spat. "They were supposed to—" She cut herself off, biting the rest in half. I kept my spoon moving through the broth. "Supposed to what?" Her jaw clenched. "They're not going to believe you forever." I set the spoon down, meeting her glare head on. "Paula, the next time an investigator knocks on my door, it won't be me under scrutiny." For a second, I thought she might lunge across the counter. Instead, she spun on her heel, storming out so fast the screen door slammed and bounced. Gravel spat under her tires as she peeled away. The silence she left behind was electric, almost humming. I knew that kind of retreat. It wasn't surrender. It was recalibration. By late afternoon, the phone rang again. Aaron's voice was sharp. "Paula's filed for legal guardianship. Emergency petition. If she gets it, she can override your decisions, access your accounts, even decide where you live." I sat down slowly, the receiver warm against my ear. Outside, the sun was lowering, the shadows long and reaching. "She's not just coming for my house anymore," I said. "No," Aaron agreed. "She's coming for you." The courtroom held that particular stillness found only in old buildings, the kind where every sound carries, and even the shuffle of a single sheet of paper seems loud enough to echo. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and the dry, almost metallic scent of old wood, polished smooth by decades of hands, heels, and the weight of other people's troubles. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows in muted shafts, catching on dust motes that drifted lazily toward the high ceiling. I sat at the respondent's table beside Aaron, her folders lined up in such precise order they might have been arranged with a carpenter's square. She gave off the kind of calm that made you believe she had already calculated every possible move and counter before the first word was spoken. Across from us, Paula's attorney, his hair parted and slicked with a sheen that caught the light, his navy suit pressed to perfection. flipped through his notes in a manner that was almost theatrical, as if the movement itself could set the tone. When the bailiff announced the judge's entrance, the entire room rose in unison. Judge Merriman, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, took her seat. The gavel's soft tap against the bench signaled the start, though the weight in the air had been there from the moment I walked in. Paula's attorney began with practiced gravity, his voice carrying easily in the wood-paneled chamber. Your Honor, my client is here today out of deep concern for her mother-in-law's welfare. Over the past year, Mrs. Doyle has demonstrated increasing confusion, forgetfulness, and questionable judgment in her financial dealings. This is not, I emphasize, an attempt at control, but a sincere effort to ensure her safety and protect her from potential exploitation. He said protect like a man bestowing a medal, but his eyes never softened. Paula sat just behind him, dressed in a pale gray suit that, under other circumstances, might have conveyed quiet dignity. Her hands rested folded in her lap, the perfect picture of a dutiful family member reluctantly stepping into unpleasant territory. When the attorney finished, Aaron rose with a deliberate calm, gathering a single folder before addressing the judge. Your Honor, the claims made here today are not supported by facts. We intend to demonstrate that Mrs. Doyle's affairs are orderly, her health is excellent, and her financial stability is beyond question. Furthermore, we will show that this petition is motivated not by concern, but by a pattern of self-interest. The first thing she presented was the trust document, filed, notarized, and beyond contest, followed by bank statements that reflected balances and transfers executed with precision. She offered my medical report last, the paper crisp and recent, signed by my physician and noting my blood pressure, reflexes, and cognitive assessment scores. When it was my turn to testify, I was sworn in and took my seat. Paula's attorney leaned forward, adopting a tone that was meant to sound gentle but rang with condescension. Mrs. Doyle, could you tell the court the current balance of your primary bank account? Yes, I answered without pause, giving the exact figure, the interest rate, and even the name of the account manager who had handled my finances for 14 years. I spelled his last name for the record. He moved to the subject of my health. And when was your last medical exam? May 3rd, I replied, looking him squarely in the eye. Blood pressure was 118/76. No concerns noted. I gestured lightly toward the file in the judge's possession. That information is also documented there. The questioning went on, but the rhythm shifted. He began flipping through his pages more quickly, his earlier certainty thinning with each precise answer I gave. When Aaron finished her redirect, Judge Merriman removed her glasses and addressed the court. The petition for guardianship is denied. The evidence presented shows no indication that Mrs. Doyle is incapable of managing her personal or financial affairs. Furthermore, and here she turned her gaze directly on Paula, filing false or unfounded claims is a serious matter. This court advises you to consider your actions carefully before proceeding in the future. The gavel fell with a sound that resonated through the room, sharp enough to cut the tension that had been wound tight all morning. Joanne, seated in the row behind me, reached forward to give my hand a quiet squeeze, her relief clear in that simple gesture. As people began to leave, Ethan approached from the side aisle. The weight in his expression was new, the careless ease of youth replaced by something heavier. "I'm sorry, Nana," he said softly, keeping his voice low so it didn't carry, "for going along with them in the beginning. I should have stood up sooner." I studied him for a moment, seeing not just my grandson, but the man he might still become. "You'll have your chance to make it right," I told him. We stepped out into the crisp afternoon light, the courthouse's stone steps warm underfoot from the late-day sun. Aaron was beginning to outline what we'd need to do next when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but I answered. "Mrs. Doyle?" The man's voice was professional, clipped. "This is Greg Monroe with Asheville Realty. I'm calling to confirm some listing paperwork we received for your property. The thing is..." He hesitated just long enough for my stomach to knot. "The signature on it doesn't look like yours." Greg Monroe's office sat on the corner of a brick building downtown, its plate glass windows fronted by a row of cheerful planters spilling late summer petunias onto the sidewalk. From the outside, it looked like any other small-town real estate office. Posters of smiling couples in front of "sold" signs, framed aerial photos of houses with perfect lawns. But as I stepped inside, the air carried the faint tang of printer ink and brewed coffee left sitting too long, like the day had already outpaced the people working it. Greg himself was behind a wide maple desk, sleeves rolled to the elbow, his tie slightly askew. He rose when I entered, extending a hand with the polite wariness of a man who suspected the conversation ahead might not be pleasant. "Mrs. Doyle," he said, "I appreciate you coming in so quickly." I set my bag on the chair across from his desk, the strap already looped over the arm so I could ease it open without fuss. Inside, my phone was angled just right, recording before I even sat down. "You mentioned some listing paperwork," I prompted. He hesitated, glancing toward the frosted glass door before lowering his voice. "Yes, your daughter-in-law Paula came in 2 days ago with documents. Deed information, a property disclosure, even a listing agreement already signed. Said she was authorized to act on your behalf." "Was she?" I said, the words flat enough to make his eyes flick up to meet mine. "I took her at her word," Greg admitted, his tone almost apologetic. "She had what looked like notarized signatures, but when you answered my call earlier, I had a feeling something wasn't adding up." "Let's not rely on feelings," I said, leaning forward. "I'd like to see those papers." He opened a drawer, rifled through a manila folder, and laid the forms in front of me. My gaze went straight to the signature at the bottom of the listing agreement. It curved in all the right places, sloped with the same rhythm as my own hand, but it wasn't mine. The loops were too high, the cross on the T too heavy. Someone had studied my name, practiced it until it felt natural. Someone had been careful, just not careful enough. "This is forgery," I said, sliding the paper back toward him, "and you'll be giving me copies of every single page she brought you." Greg didn't argue. Within minutes, I had a full set tucked into my bag, the phone still recording every word. By the time I left his office, the sun had shifted, casting the sidewalk into deep, cool shade. I called Erin from the car before I even turned the key. Her voice was all steel. "Bring me everything. We'll file a police report before close of business." That night, the air was heavy with the kind of August heat that clings even after the sun's gone down. I was watering the hydrangeas out front when Ethan's text came through. "Call me." Now he answered on the first ring, his voice pitched low but tight with urgency. "I'm in the garage, but I can hear her. She's on the phone, yelling, something about stupid realtors and overstepping." He paused. "She said your name more than once, Nana. Not in a good way." I could picture it too easily. Paula pacing, one hand white-knuckled around her phone, the other slicing the air for emphasis. The same look she'd had in court when the judge's gavel came down, only hotter now. "Stay out of her way," I told him. "And listen." When I hung up, Joanne was coming up the walk, carrying a jar of something that looked like her peach preserves. She took one look at my face and didn't bother with the usual hello. "She's unraveling," she said, handing me the jar. "You can hear it in the way she talks. Too fast, too loud, and she's not thinking about who's listening." I carried the preserves inside, setting them on the counter beside the copies from Greg's office. The papers lay there like a deck of cards waiting to be played, and I knew the next hand wasn't going to be hers. It was just after 7 on a Wednesday evening when Paula showed up, uninvited, as if the front steps and the welcome mat were still hers to cross without announcement. The cicadas were loud in the trees, and the sky held that dim, bruised light right before night takes over. She stood in the doorway, not in her usual tailored armor but in a cotton blouse and slacks, her hair pulled back hastily, a gloss of sweat across her forehead. She looked smaller than I'd seen her in months, though with Paula, I knew enough to be suspicious of appearances. "Can we talk?" she asked, voice tight but pitched low, like she didn't want the neighbors to overhear. I let her in, saying nothing, and she trailed me into the kitchen where the fan hummed against the sticky air. She didn't sit. Instead, she stood by the counter, twisting a napkin in her hands. All of this," she gestured vaguely, as though the forged listing, the police report, the court battle could be swept into one lump of inconvenience. It's gotten out of hand. We can make it go away, for the sake of family." Her words hung there, heavy and strange, as if she thought they still carried weight with me. I set my glass down on the counter, the sound small but sharp in the quiet. "Family," I said slowly, "doesn't forge your name." The color rose in her cheeks, but before she could shape a reply, Ethan stepped into the doorway. He must have heard her car in the drive and slipped in through the side gate. He looked from her to me, and for the first time there was no hesitation in where he placed himself. He came to stand on my side of the kitchen. "She's right," he said, his voice steady. "What you've done, it's not about helping her, it's about getting what you want." Paula blinked at him, genuinely startled, like she hadn't accounted for his defection. "Ethan." "Don't," he cut in, sharper than I'd ever heard him. "I've been quiet too long." That was when Brian arrived, shoulders hunched, holding himself like a man who'd rather be anywhere else. He stepped between them, hands out in a calming gesture. "We can't keep doing this," he said. "Maybe we all made mistakes, but fighting like this isn't going to fix anything." "Fixing," I said, "requires telling the truth and taking responsibility." Brian's eyes flickered, but Paula's stayed hard. She was already retreating inside herself, sealing the cracks, trying to rebuild that composure she liked to wear like a badge. I could see her preparing to walk out rather than give me what I was asking for. Joanne appeared at the back door just then, leaning against the frame with the casualness of someone who'd been listening long enough to know the lay of the land. "You know," she said, "you could just end it right here. Close the book, clean break." I caught the faintest nod from her, and I knew she was right. Some endings don't need fireworks. They just need to hold. Paula's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at me for a long moment, trying to find something. Pity, regret, a crack she could wedge into. She didn't find it. Without another word, she turned and walked out. Brian followed, casting one last tired glance over his shoulder. Ethan stayed where he was, his jaw set. That night, I sat at my writing desk, the lamp casting a warm circle over the stationery. My pen moved without hesitation. The lottery's closed. No salutation, no signature, just the truth, sealed in an envelope addressed to Paula Doyle in my smallest, neatest script. I raised the red flag on the mailbox before I went to bed, knowing that by morning the words would be on their way. And once they landed, there'd be no going back. The papers from the mailbox were gone by morning, and with them, whatever claim Paula thought she still had on my future. By the end of the week, the last of the trust funds had cleared into my control, the numbers sitting in Caleb's neat ledger like rows of guarded soldiers. I'd spent too many nights thinking about how to use them, not just to keep them safe, but to turn them into something that would outlast the kind of greed that had nearly gutted this family. On a Tuesday, I drove with Ethan out to the north edge of the lake. The road narrowed into gravel, then gave way to a small clearing that opened onto a stretch of quiet water. The property wasn't much to look at yet. A weathered boathouse, a dock missing 2 planks, a one-story cabin with peeling paint. But the air smelled clean, and the wind off the lake carried the promise of a place that could be made into something. Ethan stood on the dock, hands in his pockets, staring at the ripples moving toward shore. "Whose place is this?" "Yours to manage," I said, joining him. He turned so sharply I could see the disbelief register before the words caught up. "Manage?" I nodded. "The trust bought it this morning. You'll oversee repairs, rentals, events, whatever you can dream up. It's in your name, but under the trust's protection. No one can touch it without your say-so." He shook his head slowly, eyes scanning the property again like he needed to be sure it was real. I don't know what to say." "Then just start by not letting the dock fall in," I said, smiling. But inside, I felt the knot in my chest loosen another inch. 2 days later, Aaron came by with a stack of final documents for something else I'd been holding close, the establishment of the Doyle Community Workshop Fund in my husband's name. It would restore tools for the high school's shop class, fund apprenticeships, and keep the old woodworking barn open for anyone who wanted to learn. He'd always believed a good set of tools could change a life. Now, that belief had a ledger line, a charter, and enough seed money to last longer than I would. When Erin slid the papers across the table for my signature, her smile was quiet but full. "You've made it untouchable," she said, "and purposeful." That Friday, Joanne insisted we mark the occasion. She filled her dining room table the way only she could, platters of roast chicken, bowls of herb potatoes, a pie cooling on the sideboard. Ethan came straight from the lake, smelling faintly of sawdust, and Erin brought a bottle of wine she claimed had been waiting for the right night. We ate in that rare, easy rhythm where no one watches the clock, and the laughter moves around the table like a tide. When the plates were cleared, Erin stood with her glass raised. "To writing your own ending," she said, her gaze meeting mine over the candlelight, "and making it a damn sight better than the one they planned for you." Glasses clinked, and for the first time in months, I realized I wasn't measuring every word, every movement, against the possibility of what might be taken from me. Later, I walked home alone. The air was cool enough to carry the scent of wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney, and the stars hung bright and sharp above the ridge. Gravel crunched under my shoes, the sound steady and grounding. For so long, I'd been moving through my own life like a guest, waiting for someone to show me the door. But now the keys were mine. The lake cabin would grow into something living under Ethan's hands. The workshop fund would carry my husband's name forward, and every dollar Paula thought of as her jackpot had been redirected into a legacy she could never spend, never sell, never touch. I reached my porch and paused, looking out at the dark curve of the road. Somewhere beyond that bend, trouble might still be nursing its wounds. But for tonight, the house was mine, the future was mine, and the fear was gone. And in its place, finally, was purpose. The morning of the open house broke crisp and bright, the kind of September day that smelled faintly of cut grass and wood smoke, with just enough bite in the air to hint at the season turning. The old woodworking shed, now scrubbed, painted, and hung with strings of soft yellow bulbs, sat at the edge of the high school grounds like a patient elder finally given its due. Fresh sawdust from the new benches mingled with the scent of oiled tools, a perfume that made my chest ache in the best way. I'd spent the early hours arranging the display cases. My husband's old chisels, his well-worn mallet, the level with the brass fittings he'd refused to replace even when the wood handle cracked. Beside them sat the first pieces built by the new class, simple shelves, a dovetail box, a rocking chair so precise it could have been turned out by a master. A placard at the front read, "The Doyle Community Workshop and Museum, where craft lives on." By noon, the gravel lot was full. The local paper's photographer darted between clusters of visitors, snapping shots of students guiding townspeople through the tool stations. Laughter carried through the open double doors, along with the steady thwack of a mallet hitting a chisel. In the corner, the reporter was jotting notes, her eyes flicking toward me more than once as she scribbled. Paula and Brian arrived halfway through, as I knew they would. They didn't linger at the entrance, just stepped inside quietly, eyes sweeping over the crowd before landing on the display case. Paula's face stayed composed, but the flush on her neck told another story. Brian stood beside her, hands in his pockets, his jaw tight. Neither of them spoke to me, and I didn't offer more than a polite nod in return. Some silences are worth keeping. Ethan, wearing a collared shirt for the occasion, took the makeshift stage at the back of the room. He spoke without notes, his voice carrying over the hum of the crowd. "This place," he began, one hand resting on the handle of his grandfather's old plane, "is more than a workshop. It's a promise. That skill and patience and pride in your work still matter. My grandmother made sure we had the space and the tools, but she also made sure it would last. Protected, for the next generation and the one after that. She taught me that when you've been given something worth keeping, you take care of it. And you share it." Applause rose, warm and genuine. Across the room I saw Joanne wiping at her eyes with the corner of her scarf, her smile steady as she clapped. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't walk to the front. I stayed by the display case, my hand resting lightly on the chisel's worn handle. "If you're going to win the lottery," I said, letting my voice carry, "spend it where it matters." I didn't look toward Paula when I said it, but I didn't need to. The words landed exactly where they were meant to. The reporter caught my eye then, her pen pausing mid-scratch, and I had the sudden, unmistakable feeling that tomorrow's paper would carry more than just the facts. It would carry the story of a win and of the quiet kind of justice that doesn't need a courtroom gavel to make itself heard. The bulbs overhead swayed gently in the late afternoon breeze, casting soft halos of light over the benches, the tools, the people leaning in to see what was possible with wood and will. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed, sharp, final, but inside, the air stayed warm with the sound of planes shaving curls from cedar and the low murmur of voices building something together. It struck me then that the real victory wasn't just in keeping what was mine, it was in turning it into something no one could ever take. The sun was sinking low enough to gild the tops of the maples when Ethan and I settled into the porch chairs, the ones with the slatted backs that creaked in a way I'd come to think of as a kind of punctuation in our conversations. The air held that September mix of warmth and edge, cool enough to make the steam from our coffee visible in the fading light. Somewhere down the road, a dog barked twice, then thought better of it. Ethan had been quiet since he arrived, a folded envelope resting against his thigh. When he finally slid it across the small table between us, the paper was soft from being handled too many times. I set my mug down, took my time opening it, smoothing the crease with my thumb. The letterhead was bold, the kind you recognized even before you read the words beneath. "We are pleased to inform you." The rest was a blur until I found the sentence that mattered. "Accepted into the Small Business Development Fellowship, full funding provided." When I looked up, his grin was cautious, like he didn't quite believe it yet. "Figured it might help with the lake place," he said. "Classes in management, marketing, all that stuff, I don't know yet." "It'll do more than help," I said, hearing the pride in my own voice. "It'll make it yours in a way that nothing, and no one, can touch." We let the quiet settle for a while after that, watching the light stretch long across the yard. The cicadas had started their evening chorus, a slow build that matched the rhythm of the day winding down. "I've been thinking about the museum," he said eventually. "We could add weekend classes for kids, teach them to build something simple. A birdhouse, maybe? Get them hooked early." I smiled. "That's how your grandfather started, hammering bent nails into scrap pine and calling it a masterpiece." His laugh was soft, but it carried. "We could use the lake cabin for retreats, too. Weekends for veterans, or maybe artists who just need a place to work." The ideas flowed easily, like water finding the path it was always meant to take. It was the first time in a long while that our conversations about the future weren't shadowed by what someone else might take away. The screen door creaked, and Joanne stepped out, balancing a pie on one hand like she'd been born doing it. "I heard voices," she said, setting it down on the porch rail, "and I figured you two could use a little sugar with all that planning." "Peach?" I asked, catching the scent before she answered. "Of course," she said, lowering herself into the third chair. "Nothing else tastes like summer's holding on for dear life." We sat there as the light thinned, passing the pie plates between us, coffee mugs refilled from the thermos Joanne had thought to bring. The conversation meandered from tool donations to dock repairs, to which neighbor's dog had decided my yard was a better bathroom than its own. The easy, ordinary kind of talk that only comes when there's nothing left to guard against. At some point, I looked out past the porch rail to where the last sunlight spilled like honey across the grass, catching in the spiderwebs stretched between the fence posts. It struck me how much had shifted, not just in the past months, but in me. "Funny thing about lotteries," I said, almost to myself. "Sometimes you win by keeping the ticket to yourself." Ethan's eyes met mine, and he nodded like he understood more than I'd said aloud. Joanne didn't say anything at all, just topped off my coffee and slid the sugar bowl closer. The shadows lengthened, the air cooling enough that I thought about fetching a blanket, but I didn't move. The pie was still warm, the company was good, and for the first time in too long, the future didn't feel like something to brace against. Before dessert that night, I'd already claimed my prize, freedom.